that means it's time to go. Pretty
Time to
much.
go.
Um,
Okay. You want to do a miniature spiel? Not the
yeah,
spiel we did last week, but
I suppose the spiel is just like welcome to Uncertain Futures episode 2. This is the place where me and my co-host Joan Summers Donnelly take you on a sort of rickety adventure through the possible timelines of our future, where we take this confusing time to reflect upon how confusing things could be, and where me and Joan try to speak more slowly. That's my intro. Would you like to add anything to that?
No, that was very good.
Oh, thanks. Well, why don't you start us off, Joan? Oh yeah, sorry. The thing I should have said is each week, each of us will present to the other some fun notions about uncertainty in the past and the future, and then get some hot takes. These are the hottest takes you can get. So I did that first last time, Joan. So I think that you should go first this time.
Okay. Just one moment. Can you do a little bit of stalling music there, Patrick? And already we're out of content.
In terms of stalling music, I'm afraid that I have actually got. Oh my god, my clarinet has got a reed on it, so I could within seconds be playing people the music they definitely didn't think they wanted to hear, but now they are. Name it some. I don't know. What's like a good sci-fi theme, like Star Wars? That's actually a tricky melody. I've forgotten it. You know? Oh god, this is all on the podcast now. This is terrible.
Okay, why don't I just start?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so let me see now. I was going to say, okay, Patrick, do you want to choose between a more fun future scenario, potentially fun, or a not so fun future scenario? But then I just went ahead and took the liberty of just choosing the fun one.
Okay. You just didn't trust me.
So in the 70s,
yeah.
Okay, so New York was like almost bankrupt. So this architect called Peter Blake in New York, he proposed that Walt Disney Productions should take over New York.
Wow.
Yeah. And he wrote in New York Magazine that the only new towns of any significance built in this country since World War II are Disneyland and Disney World. And yeah, it was actually, it wasn't like he thought New York should be turned into a theme park, but just that Walt Disney had amazing visions for urban planning and implementation. And I don't, have you been to Disney World? Is that the one?
I have not been to any Disney place.
Me neither, which makes us great that we're talking about it. we're the ones talking. Never been there, but anyway. So there's this thing called Epcot, and it's still today like one of the theme parks. I get the impression there's multiple like different parks within Disney World in Florida. I don't know. People should comment with information if they know more about it, if they've been to Disney World. But yeah, and one of them is called Epcot, and they kind of just call it that. They sort of have done away with it as an acronym. It's just like the name of it now. But it originally was stood for the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, and it was one of Walt Disney's passion projects. So it was kind of based on this English guy, Ebenezer Howard, great name, Garden Cities of Tomorrow, and that was like basically he's sort of the guy that came up with suburbs.
Okay.
But that like oh we should get out of the city and we should like live with closer to nature and have more space, but still all the conveniences and job opportunities that a town or city can provide. And yeah, that's sort of like I think he's quite influential in the like garden cities, like in urban planning. Like even suppose those ideas are still around now, but it's funny how I think suburbs that was my less fun um track to go down, by the way. But I think suburbs like it's funny how I suppose like a lot of things when originally it was dreamt up, it was like this ultra utopian. Wow, we can live in nature, but also be near the city and be together and be connected.
Yeah.
And now, like when you think about a lot of suburbs in all places in the world, particularly, which I think is like I think North America is sort of like the I don't know.
Yeah,
that seems to be the most suburbified.
Suburbs, lots of massive houses,
and,
can't get anywhere, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and from what I gather, can be quite dystopian in a way.
Yes.
Yeah. So Disney kind of wanted to, but this idea of having like nature, but also cities, and there will be like a fully pedestrianized central city with monorails running out from the central hub to suburban living spaces like spokes from wheels. And I kind of did a pitch about this, but like, it didn't really. Hang on, now I'm just gonna find this more information. He also wanted that it would be like a constantly evolving. It was like the place to like to try out new ideas and new technologies, and like emerging from the creative centers of American industry, and like it'd be a city of tomorrow or community of tomorrow, city of tomorrow, never completed, but always like introducing new things and demonstrating new materials, and that like people would actually live there. For like about 20,000 people, and it would be a test city for city planning and stuff. But then Walt Disney, then he died. That was like just before he died that he kind of came up with all this stuff. But then he died, and like Disney Productions were like, well, we don't really want to be in the business of running a city because
it's a pretty big job.
Yeah, it is. So then it kind of just turned it into like a theme park. So it is like you can go there, and there is like two areas. One is like the future world, which is all of these kind of futuristic, although I suppose kind of from like the 70s and 80s, the 90s, futuristic, like building a geodesic dome and this kind of stuff. And there's also then there's future world, and then there's world showcase, which is described as kind of like a permanent World's Fair of like like Japanese pavilion, like with the pagoda, and like the German pavilion with this kind of timber frame house and like a beer garden and this kind of
everything's in Gothic font.
Mm-hmm.
With everything in Gothic font.
Yes, exactly. Just as Hitler would have wanted it.
Actually, side note, I did watch an episode of 99% Invisible on this, and actually Hitler hated the Gothic font, but it still ended up representing Nazi ideology.
Fun fact: Hitler hated the Gothic font.
Yeah, no, it is interesting.
So maybe we should revive it, like that, and like
I think it's too late.
And too hard to read. So basically, hang on, there was just one nice little quote from when they opened So the dedication plaque near the entrance states, "To all who come to this place of joy, hope, and friendship, welcome. Epcot is inspired by Walt Disney's creative vision. Here, human achievements are celebrated through imagination, wonders of enterprise, and concepts of a future that promises new and exciting benefits for all. May Epcot Center entertain, inform, and inspire, and above all, may it instill a new sense of belief and pride in man's ability to shape a world that offers hope to people everywhere." It's kind of interesting because it seems like the place itself, like that's the opening of the theme park, but also that he wanted to build a city that would be like about the future and not the present, like testing ideas, like sort of that the whole fun of it, or maybe draw of it for people to live there or to be in the park, is about like what is the shininess of what could be. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's not like it's even like not just, oh, in the future we'll live with it like this, but in the future I want to build something where people will live and test out ideas for the future. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. And then I was also just like thinking, what would it be like if New York had been taken over by Disney?
um,
And like city, just I don't know, the possibility of cities, like yeah, that we could maybe discuss, like maybe already partially, or there's cases where it already has happened or is happening. Yeah, cities run by companies,
yeah.
Disney or otherwise.
I mean,
Um,
it is a concept that has a very dark history, but I gotta say I'm mildly seduced by aspects of it. Obviously, the kind of company towns that are, I think, typified by late 1800s, early 1900s America were super dystopian. It was just the control that the company had on the people who lived in the city was so absolute that they could really just extract wealth from them. Pretty heedlessly, and it's also not, and also I think it's definitely true that cities don't actually exist as a function of central planning, even though it can add things or do things poorly, etc. Have a lot of input. They are sort of emergent properties or emergent structures and organizations. So it's always really, I love thinking. I mean, when you talk about like greenways and stuff like that, I was almost attempted to do a sort of similar subject, and I'm very glad I didn't for today. But to me, it seems so obvious that we could live in a city where transport was done either more underground or more using public transport or a combination thereof, and we could be walking through parkways, on instead of streets. Like it's not impossible, and yet it seems like such a utopian fantasy.
What that instead of streets there'd be concrete, there'd be like grassways.
Yeah. I mean, there already are parkways that are kind of popping up more and more in urban centers. I know in New York, the city that he almost owned, it would seem, or some people would like him to have owned. There are like old subway lines, or over, like, I don't know how to say a subway above ground except by saying S-Bahn. But that there's one famous one.
Trains.
But is it just a train if it goes up over tunnels in the city, like the Dart? Is there a way of referring to that other than just saying train?
Yeah, I like I don't know what it's called in general. Yeah, but yeah.
But
monorail.
Yeah. So Robbie there is saying, what if we all lived in cities controlled by our employer? And I think that captures the terrifying reality of company towns in the past.
Like the Fordlandia. Do you know about Fordlandia?
No.
There is Johan Johansson, the Icelandic musician, has a whole concept album about Fordlandia, which was like basically, I think Ford, like the Ford car company, built I'm pretty sure it is a real story. And now as I'm telling it, I'm like doubting, like, did this really happen, or did this Icelandic artist invent it? Which is also possible. But yeah, no, I think they built kind of like an American style town, like in the the Amazon, and it was sort of like near like a rubber plant. So it was for the workers to live there, and they had everything like like a kind of like a canteen where they could eat with American food, and like the houses were really like in American style. And then just the employees just kind of abandoned it because they were sort of, it was like, oh, you can move in here and you have a house for your family and it's great and la. But like it was just sort of jarring, I guess, for people to like live in this very different way of living with everything, all the food being imported, and like American hamburger and stuff. So yeah. I think it just got abandoned, but I think it's still there or something.
Yeah, I think it's a puzzle. Like there are planned cities that did successfully become real cities. But I've also
like loads.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that. Like I remember reading the Bill Bryson Down Under, like his travel writing when I was like I don't know, 12 or 13. I don't know why, a very boring thing to read. It's like travel writing about Australia. But anyway, and I remember reading, and he was talking about Canberra, which is the capital there, and talking about how it had been planned out and to have certain like squares with flowers in the middle. And I remember just thinking, hang on, like I never knew before that some cities were planned, like before they didn't just all naturally, like you were saying, kind of just people were living there some few hundred years ago, and then they just kind of
kept it up.
More people went there, and they just kept it up. Yeah, they just kept it good or bad work usually in terms of like urban planning.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, I remember just being like, what a strange concept. But also, I had a very negative impression of it because he wasn't really a fan, Bill Bryson, that is, of Canberra, and it just sounded very boring. And like, it was just created to be the capital, and not exactly a buzzing hub with a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe there's better examples.
Well, I think the reality is there aren't that many, but there are still people who are very keen on making this a real thing. I mean, charter cities are a concept that I've been kind of periodically interested in as a result of watching one and now a few TED Talks. And there was one that nearly got built, got permission. So the concept of a charter city is the idea that a city could be built and it would be allowed to have its own sort of sub-constitution within the borders of a nation state. I mean, ideally a charter city would just be in international waters, and there's lots of like libertarians who fantasize about creating these perfect worlds without rules. And I don't find that particularly realistic, but there are plenty of people who have a more measured notion as to how one could create a lot of value for a lot of people, especially in developing countries, by experimenting with the design of cities, both on an architectural level, which is kind of more your focus here, but also just in terms of what rules could be used to better structure life within that context. The one that was nearly built, and it was either a Central American country. Basically, the executive okayed it, and interestingly enough, I believe it was Milton Friedman's son. Although apparently he's not as much of a neoliberal as you'd expect, but still probably is a bit. But I think it was him who was going to be heading the company that had huge investors behind them to build a charter city there. I'll have to double check where that was. But then it was the Supreme Court that just said, no, this is illegal. You can't just make new laws in a subsection of our territory. There's no permission for that in the Constitution, and it was blocked as a result.
Yeah, it's also interesting. I know this is an example that didn't like examples of like utopian like communities or kind of cities that were set up and then kind of went disastrously wrong. I suppose Fordlandia is the example of that in a way. But then like it's interesting to think, okay, well why didn't that work? But I suppose then those examples also just make people think like, no use even trying to think that way. But there was a few other what you said there about like the charter cities. There was also, I was reading about this stuff about New York. There was also an idea to I don't know if I can find here what I was reading about, but that idea that they would kind of have like build a floating city, like, and it was going to be I don't know if it was going to be by New York or actually somewhere else. And then another thing, like there's also in the 60s, Buckminster Fuller wanted to transform New York with like build a dome over Manhattan, and yeah, it's interesting in terms of like
because he just liked the shape of the dome.
No, well, I think it was about reducing air pollution and regulating weather as well. But it's quite ahead of his time in a way. Well, I suppose he was generally ahead of his time, but ahead of his time in a way of like in terms of like geoengineering, which we kind of
that's a concept that I think I'll eventually feel the need to bring up. Yeah,
I just feel the need to talk about geoengineering. And he also said, yeah, it's ambitious, but the cost of snow removal in New York City would pay for the dome in 10 years. So yeah, interesting. This is the thing. Triton was the proposed name for the 2 square mile tsunami-proof floating city. I don't know how it's tsunami-proof, but handy. It would provide its 5,000 residents with everything from water to education. Oh yeah, it was supposed to be originally proposed for Tokyo Bay by Matsutaro Shoriki. Um, yeah, and then he sent it to Buckminster Fuller, and in the US they were also like, yeah, sounds good. And then, but then it said the idea was ultimately sunk by bureaucracy, apparently.
I'm wondering how big
So
this fucking dome would be. Like, I feel like it would have to be the tallest structure ever built.
pretty big, yeah.
Like by a long shot. I feel like it would have to be over a kilometer high.
Yeah, it probably has to be quite high. All right, but yeah,
I mean, it sounds rad.
yeah. Do you want to move on to your idea?
Yeah, I'll jump
Or
onto that.
an idea, your idea. What's your idea for the future, Patrick?
Here's what I think, Joan. All right.
I don't know what's about but something about like I feel like it's necessary here to say something along the lines of that it feels like we are increasingly going towards like corporate owned cities.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, even the thing of public space being like in a lot of places more owned by places that seem like public spaces, like kind of plazas, or like in a lot of cities like in Europe and North America are now increasingly like, oh, actually private, they're owned by some companies or whatever that have buildings there. And yeah, so even though we're kind of like laughing about there's also like Ray Bradbury apparently was like the sci-fi writer was apparently friends with Walt Disney, and he was like he was all for this like Disney taking over New York thing apparently, and saying that like people that basically he kind of had a vision, that create. I think it was sort of something along the lines of like, well, Disney's like creative and has this vision for how people could live, and it's exciting. They want to go and see what like the future is like, so they want to go to Disneyland.
Yeah.
And that maybe should but then I think that's kind of a problem, is that like these big vast like or these really big concept ideas for cities, whereas that often doesn't work. If it's like, let's have it like this, and if it's too radical or something, it might I suppose it can be livable for people. There's so many examples of that, of like bad like urban design or planning things that's just like, well, why don't people just live like this? And then it's like when you try and put them into like, or big tower blocks that at the edges of the cities, and like, oh, this is great, people will all live really condensedly, and we'll just move these poorer people out of the city centre because they're all living in slums. And it seems like a good idea, but then when it's like not as badly thought out, then without like little consultation, then that's just going to be another problem you'll have to try to want to try to deal with as a city or whatever in a few decades. So so I think when things come in, like kind of parachuted in, I don't know. But then I suppose, like a big corporation incrementally changing things, but also based on their own like profit margins, maybe not be great either.
I suppose that for me, there's like a need to demarcate the process of like an existing city trying to try out new things, in which case usually the first obvious thing for them to do is to look at similar cities that have better functioning systems for reasons that are obviously a function of some problem in the city's infrastructure. And Ireland, or Dublin specifically, and actually all cities in Ireland, as far as I'm aware, have a lot of similar kind of early mistakes that are hard to correct and stuff. But we can tell pretty confidently that if we were to address them, you would see benefits. So I mean, some of this would be like the radial bus network is like a controversial one in Ireland now. Most cities have kind of come across this problem and many have solved it, and it's sort of low hanging fruit, but it's still like a political task to implement any of those things. And obviously increasing cycle infrastructure is a huge one. Increasing the volume of people that can go through public transport. The fact that we don't have public toilets, I mean, these things are kind of, there's nothing super crazy and exciting and fun about them. But then when it comes to the people who are trying to set up this brand new stuff, I suppose part of what you were describing and what I think Bill Bryson was describing in the Australian, in the capital of Australia, whose name I am blanking on,
Just goes to show what a successful city it is.
Exactly, just how thriving it is that yeah, you need some kind of friction in the sense of you need something. I say friction in the sense that I think if you have a perfect abstraction, even if you were correct about a lot of the ideas about how people would live, if you're just like throwing people into this unworn, unlived, unrooted existence, it's going to be pretty alienating. And I think the challenge there is not necessarily obvious, but it's still fun to think that they might succeed one day, and we might have some kind of analogy or analog to Disney running New York, and we can go and experiment with crazy domes and stuff. I think it's fun. Anyway,
don't you want to go to work on a roller coaster?
Absolutely, for at least a little while.
Yeah. But what do you think? Maybe people would like, maybe we should have more like a more fun, theme park approach to cities. Because then also, like, if you went on a roller coaster to work every day, you might like, mistakenly think that you actually like your job because of the adrenaline,
Yeah.
And then the world would be a better place.
I mean, yeah, now we're getting into some deep stuff. Whether or not roller coaster happiness is the same as real happiness.
Well, that's a discussion for a whole other show.
Absolutely. Right, well, I suppose I'll jump on to my topic. It is somewhat fractured because I resisted the urge to just talk about nuclear power, despite my mild obsession with the topic. But what I couldn't resist was taking one little anecdote, because it's actually interesting because it's relevant to Ireland, and because I think it speaks volumes to the question of how uncertain the future can be, and also what kinds of predictions can be very uncertain in themselves. So, Joan, do you know by any chance if Ireland has ever had a Nobel Prize winner in science?
In science?
Yeah. Now.
Sure. Yeah. Haven't we? Or have we not? I don't know.
We have had one Nobel Prize winner in science. And his name was Ernest Walton. And he did something pretty significant. Him and Cockcroft and Walton, in 1932, they went and they split lithium into alpha particles, which is essentially helium, using protons from a particle accelerator. Basically, the first use of a particle accelerator. So it was a huge moment in science and in sort of the fundamentals of how we understand reality, which is really cool. But when they were doing that work, they were working under Lord Rutherford. Have you ever heard of Rutherford?
Oh yes, didn't he do something about hitting particles?
I think you're talking about the gold foil experiment.
Yes, that's. I am.
Yeah, but there's no point diving. I'm not going to dive into the background of Rutherford too much. Just to say that he was the father of nuclear physics. He's cited in the Encyclopedia Britannica as being the greatest experimentalist since Michael Faraday, who was a big deal. And he got the Nobel Prize in chemistry, and I believe he also got the Nobel Prize in physics. Of that part, I actually think I might have made up. I think it's a funny joke that he got the Nobel Prize in chemistry because he famously said that there's only one science that's physics and the rest is just bookkeeping or something, or stamp collecting. It was stamp collecting. He said stamp collecting, and then he got a Nobel Prize in chemistry. So he got a Nobel Prize in stamp collecting. So anyway, those
scientists, they're just
they're just crazy. They're just shit talking each other.
What jokers they are.
Exactly. So after Cockcroft and Walton had done their experiment, Rutherford published, statements about his analyses, and everyone thought, like, this guy is the man who knows what's going on here. And I'll just quote this little passage. We might in these processes obtain very much more energy than the proton supplied, but on average we could not expect to obtain energy in this way. It was a very poor and inefficient way of producing energy, and anyone who looked for a source of power in the transformation of the atom was talking moonshine. But the subject was scientifically interesting because it gave insights into the atoms. So there's Rutherford saying, and he was part of a larger piece where he was basically making this argument that it's completely insane to think that you'll ever get power out of splitting atoms. And what's interesting is that at the time when he said that, there was a man whose name is Leo Szilard, who's kind of a little bit less famous, and he'd been going through some legal troubles relating to Hitler and stuff. So he was like a refugee scholar, living in hotels and stuff like that. But he was super genius. And he read the piece that Rutherford wrote in the Times. He read a summary of it. And he was so annoyed at this dismissal of the notion of nuclear power, which he was already sort of, he thought would be a cool thing, that day, the story goes, he conceived of the idea of the nuclear chain reaction, using the kind of the rods as a means of controlling the chain reaction, and patented not long after the nuclear power plant. And I guess I can't. I bring that up because it's very tempting to sort of. This is a very acute example of even someone who has incredible knowledge of a domain, who thinks, who we can trust to be an authority on it, they still get caught in the assumptions of the norms of what's going on, and can be comfortable dismissing possibilities, very comfortable dismissing possibilities. And we see it with a lot of other possibilities. We see that, one of the Wright brothers said that no plane would ever fly over the Atlantic. So there's lots of great stories like this. I'll probably end up bringing up more in the future. But I just thought I'd bring that one up because when it got to the end of my actual subject, we'd be in the realm of perhaps similarly outlandish sounding statements in this context, in the present, as the idea of nuclear power was at the time. So, what I actually want to talk about is health. Uncertain futures regarding what human health could be like. And this is, of course, a sensitive topic at the moment, but I'm mostly going to talk about either funny or nice things that could be different in the future regarding health. I may dive into some somewhat darker topics depending upon the time we have. And of course, we all know that human health used to be pretty rubbish. Have you ever had a bad toothache, Joan?
A bad toothache? Sorry, yeah. I didn't quite catch that.
Have you ever had a bad toothache?
I had wisdom tooth pain, which were then removed quite...
promptly?
Well, the actual removal of them, I wasn't really
you weren't there.
So I wasn't there. So, which I'm guessing is quite in contrast to what you're going to...
Well, what's striking is in the past, so it's if you look up quotes about toothaches from like the sages over time, you'll find a lot of content, right? Just because toothaches were something that was eventually visited upon everyone, and often, not necessarily when they were old. And the pain that you experience when your tooth is rotting and nothing is to be done, or if you've got a whole root canal situation going on, and I haven't experienced much of it myself, it's just supposed to be awful. It's supposed to be like getting your fingernails ripped off, and it just doesn't stop. And so you get fun quotes like this. This is from George Bernard Shaw. The man with a toothache thinks everyone happy whose teeth are sound. Then you've got C.S. Lewis. If only this toothache would go away, I would write another chapter on the problem of pain. And there's actually just, whole lists of these. The one that I originally thought of was from Benjamin Franklin, where he basically said if there were no toothaches, everyone would be happy forever. And that's obviously not the
words. Wow.
But now, thanks to dentists, and of course to the fluoride in our water, shout out to the fluoride out there, we don't live with that pain, and although we aren't as happy as Ben Franklin jokingly suggested, I think it's a meaningful improvement on the quality of life that we have that we don't appreciate, and I think it's very likely that some of these will come in the future. and some of them will come sooner than others, and some of them are silly, and some of them are serious. So I'll start in the sillier end. Balding it's something that is inconsequential, except for the very fact that people have invested so much to prevent it. I think is a bit of a moral travesty. Until Bill Gates got into the game, balding was getting more funding as a health problem than malaria.
Oh my god.
Indeed. Thankfully, that's no longer true, but just because of the increase in the malaria side. So they've been working real hard on this male pattern baldness issue. It's a top priority for a lot of people. And as a man who has less hair density on the top of my head than before, I know that I will be part of this great upheaval. But the change could be around the corner, and I don't think that's important, but I just think it's funny to imagine that there could be a day in a month, in a year. A month is unlikely, I suppose, but in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, where a product is released. It has such mass appeal that it doesn't need to be priced very high for the company to make massive returns, and suddenly there are no bald men. Does that not kind of that would just no longer be a part of the landscape? I just find that strange.
Baldness.
Yeah, like baldness could just be gone.
Do you think it would be a great cultural loss, or?
No, I don't think it would be a loss at all. I think it's obviously weird that we obsess over it as much as we do, as in terms of investment. But I think it's funny to imagine that something that, for our whole lives we've watched television shows, we've had friends, we've known people, and this has just been a thing about their appearance that happens, and then that would just be gone. Like, people just wouldn't look the same anymore.
Yeah. It's also one of those things. Sorry.
No, go on. Yeah.
It's also one of those things that makes you marvel at the. To think as touching on what we talked about last week, we are able to people who are not fertile are able to say in a test tube make a baby, make a person. So we figured out that. We haven't figured out how to stop people losing hair.
See, actually, that's a great point, because I sort of think that what's striking here is that there's no way to know which are the hard problems to solve, right? There's no way to know if there is an easy solution to this problem that has been intractable for a long time, and sometimes it seems so striking that something that should be on the face of it incredibly complex, we have great systems for, and then for something as silly as baldness, it's just sort of it's just the domain of mostly fake products, as far as I can tell at this moment. I haven't actually delved into the entirety of the catalog there. And that actually brings me to another health fun example, and that is obesity. So obviously, obesity is it's a difficult topic for various reasons, but as a health problem, it's one of the biggest ever, and it's under the current circumstances proves to be a significant risk factor for individuals. But before any of that was relevant, it was already true that obesity was. I think it was somewhere. It was in the early 2000s that obesity outstripped hunger as a source of deaths.
Oh my god!
Indeed. So there's lots of dark things about that, but that's one of those problems where I think because for so many reasons, partly because it's moralized, it's kind of essentialized about a person. Because individuals frequently develop unhealthy attitudes towards their own bodies and eating. I feel like it seems like this eternal problem to people, and it's one of the ones where it's kind of hard to imagine, but it's still very possible that a drug could be developed that simply deals with the issue, or even there's either a drug that could regulate metabolism, or you could have food that itself is not calorically significant. People do that, though it's had mixed results so far. But I think it would be very striking to live in a future where that dimension of difference between people could simply be either very uncommon or gone entirely. And I don't think it's inconceivable.
I've never thought about it before. I guess because it's kind of a niche thing. The possibility of like a future with some kind of medication or product that you can take to I don't know, counter the calories that you eat. So basically, there will be a solution to being obese that isn't like to do with diet, what you actually eat or your exercise or whatever exercising. And I mean, now that I think about it, it's like both, a bit sort of, seems a bit, on the one hand, a bit depressing, but also like much more realistic than like everyone changing, we're actually changing their eating habits to that, and not just eating habits, but like, obviously obesity correlates a lot with, sort of like food poverty, if that's the right word, of like what food is available to people that's cheap and, fast food, and in kind of where countries where there's more greater inequality, often then can be more obesity because, people don't have access to, I think it's a food poverty, like fresh food poverty, people don't have access to like fresh food and stuff. So, but still the idea that like, oh, okay, we're just going to, instead of kind of trying to really reform any of those things, we'll just we've come up with this great drug. But I mean, it seems more likely that that would happen than
No, yeah, I think it's. I mean, one of the things that makes it easy to imagine is steroids. Steroids are essentially that, except in addition to weight loss, there's muscle gain, which is still a very important health objective, and then there's lots of negative side effects that are very bad for you. Both physically and apparently psychologically, though I haven't delved into that aspect as much. But yeah, it's true that if you give a person steroids and they do the exact same thing that they did for the previous month in terms of physical routines and eating, they will just lose fat and gain muscle. That will just happen. So there's nothing impossible about it. It's just that once you start tinkering with people's hormones, you can have unexpected effects that can be problematic. But it's definitely the case that that trade-off is made all the time by people, as we mentioned last week. The big change in life that occurred when the contraceptive pill became available, and of course that is some major hormone tinkering that's going on there. But it's still people evaluate it as being worth it.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of like, fear at the idea of like genetic modification, which maybe we won't dive into now because I don't know. Maybe we'll like have some discussion on it based around specific examples like in the future.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, of course, there's a lot of well-founded fears around it. Once you start, like you say, messing with people's hormones or their genes or something, what could be the consequences? But at the same time, that I feel that kind of fear around, messing around with those things or like playing God or something. That fear is more present than the sort of, I suppose, acknowledging that we have already been doing those things and they're not always, that maybe sometimes it gives advantages, like the contraceptive, or like the contraceptive pill, as you said, that that is actually lauded as sort of like was a huge kind of thing for women, feminism, like women's time, being able to have like reproductive more control over their reproduction and things.
Absolutely.
So that there's always been that we've altered things that in their quote unquote natural state, because what is their natural state? Like we've altered things in our bodies, or and that actually maybe lets us live more the way that we want to, or the way that gives people more freedom in a way. So but I suppose it's a question of like, well, who decides which things are better or not?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, I suspect.
Have you got more? You said you were going to go from the fun to the.
Well, now this one is. It's not so much. It's still actually. This one's actually probably the nicest story here, because it relates to to real progress that may or may not translate to a clinical solution. But if it did, it would be pretty nice. I think most people would agree on that, except for the Christian Scientists and stuff, which were a group, if you're not aware, who I'm not sure how active they are now, but one of the big ideas was you shouldn't go to a doctor. So the idea is you should sort of allow illness to strike you, and it runs its course, and that is as its fate.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that's like the opposite of this show. Yeah, so this is an article that came out in Nature Immunology. I'm trying to recall what institution the division of immunology is. Cardiff School of Medicine. There you go. So this is a paper about essentially an accidental research direction that was struck upon by some immunologists who were actually trying to develop antibodies T cell. Yeah, they were working on T cells. So these are immune cells. And the purpose was to get them to attack particular cells, human cells. So when you're working with human cells, you usually work with cancer cells because they're the ones you can reproduce in vitro. But they were looking to target the cancer cells that had been infected with a particular pathogen. So it was all about trying to target this pathogen, and it didn't work with a particular assay. So they just had a particular T cell line up, and it just started killing all the cancer cells. And that's not crazy. I mean, they're T cells; they kill things. If this one was just programmed in such a way that it would kill any cell it came across, that would be normal enough. But they decided to test it, and so they ran the T cell on a mixed plate of cancer cells and non-cancerous cells, or cancer cells expressing different proteins, etc. And they found, after just meticulous test after meticulous test, that no matter what cancer type they were using, and no matter what healthy cells were adjacent, the T cells always killed the cancer cells, and they didn't kill the healthy cells. And so this paper was published in 2019, I believe, and it's basically a very exciting research direction, as I understand it. And what it points to is another one of these kind of game-breaking moments, and that's why I brought up that quote at the beginning, where people sort of have their sense of a situation as experts, and they say things like, with cancer, we will never find a cure to cancer, because cancer is lots of different diseases, each of which has to be addressed in its own way, because there are different cell types, there are different tissues, there are different metabolic rates, there are different ages, etc. And I don't think it's an unreasonable analysis, but nonetheless, because of that feature of the analysis, which is to predict what cannot be done, it opens itself up to every possible angle by which a cure to all cancers might be developed. Now it's very obviously wonderful if this one turns out to be it, but what it sort of demonstrates is that even for those things where we are, we've taken it the most seriously, where there's the most active research, where people, from all communities have huge stakes in supporting, the war on cancer. Joe Biden, who may be the next president, is determined to eradicate cancer, and even in that context, we weren't thinking as big as what an accidental research project could sort of throw at us. So that's the last little health focused piece there. So, what are your thoughts? Do you think it's bogus, or do you think that by the time you might get cancer won't exist?
Oh, a big question for a late Thursday night. I don't know. Not an intelligent enough answer, but well, yeah, it is interesting to think that I suppose in the past there were other things that were always like death sentences that now can be easily treated or don't exist because of like vaccines and things. So it's not inconceivable that we could find something that cures cancer, all cancers. And yeah, I mean, it would kind of be amazing. It is that sort of, it is the go-to, the like, oh, the cure for cancer, curing cancer.
Yeah.
Oh, like, it's a go-to, like the kind of the holy grail of like, not just scientific, but any kind of human endeavor. You know what I mean? If you're making a joke of like, what do you do? Like find the cure for cancer or something? You know, it's like um, but I just wonder. I can't help wondering, and this is very like maybe like just shows what kind of weirdo I am. But like wondering, well, if we, yeah, how much if we cured something that kills a lot of people, and it was maybe accessible around the world, then what happened? You know, sort of like if we cure all the diseases, like what's gonna happen then? You know, like will new diseases come? Will um will we be anyway living and have a different kind of population, or be like have population growing? Will populations be growing in a different way anyway? I'm just wondering
Yeah.
what is the. I'm thinking of, I suppose, the outcome, or what are the consequences of like I suppose in the past there haven't really been though negative consequences of, or have there been, of diseases being cured or eradicated?
I don't know of any disease eradications that are now hailed as terrible things. I think that if you wanted to be, actually Matthew, who just referred to Adam Curtis having a good bit on the war against cancer, but he once told me an anecdote which was very funny, and I'd only heard a little bit about it, and it was these guys who did an economic analysis of smoking, because of course countries charge a tax on, to most countries, we have a fucking massive one, on tobacco and cigarettes, and the justification for that is, well, we need to pay for, well, A, a disincentive, but B, this costs us money in health services to accommodate for your dying. And this guy, these guys did this analysis where they were like, well, actually, we ran the numbers, and because lung cancer kills you really quickly, and people who live beyond a certain number of years are likely to choke up the medical system for a longer period of time, it actually saves money for the state to have people die of lung cancer. And everyone got really mad at them, and then they were like, no, why did we do this?
I mean, yeah, sometimes it's hard to speak the truth, the truth sayer. That's interesting. So it's saving the government money for people to die of lung cancer.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was their conclusion. I can't speak to if there were any flaws in the analysis. I think mostly people focused on just how horrible it was.
Yeah. So it's when you just get down to, like, when you're just crunching numbers and you just kind of lay them out without I suppose, yeah, context or cushioning things. Yeah, it can kind of come across quite harshly. Yeah.
I mean, that's a
I
big.
don't know. It's also the things in the pure economic terms versus, like, I'm sure people don't love their loved ones dying prematurely of lung cancer. But then yeah, what would it be like if there was no disease, if we were able to eradicate everything? I mean, I do feel,
Well, I mean, you'd have to.
I think new disease would come about, but you know what I mean. What kind of, like, if everybody, I don't know. I just want to watch it. What would that change about society if
Well, I think
nobody ever?
we would already be more like what we have become, in the sense of having an older population, and then you could take Japan or Korea. I think actually is the oldest population now. I could be wrong there. And we can learn something from looking at that. I mean, you talk about new diseases becoming more of a concern, and that almost certainly would be the case. But also, there's the question of aging itself, and I suppose you do have cases of people in their hundreds who still are pretty cognitively all there. But I think that's one of the big barriers in terms of people envisaging a life lived very, very late into their years as a life worth living. I think a lot of what they think about, certainly what I think about and what I hear people talk about, is the idea of losing a sense of who they are and all that kind of thing. And so that would be a huge. I mean, I think that would change everything, right? If forget about the cancer. If like next year we were just like, oh, we have cured all forms of dementia, I think that would really change how people viewed aging. I think they would really start being
It's
like.
true that I think a lot of people have there's a lot of people have fear. You know, there's people who feel like they don't want to get older. They really have some fear of aging, or like, you know, living into older age, because I think there is a lot of anxiety around this, like about this idea that you lose yourself, or like dementia, or something, like, you know, that you can, or that you physically can't do the things you used to do. And it's true that there's a lot of negative feeling and thought, you know, even in just like, you know, how people talk or joke about, like, oh, you're an old man, or, you know, you can't do anything, or something, you know, like that there is, you know, even in kind of just colloquialisms, but you know, negativity around getting older. And then rather than, you know, maybe thinking, okay, maybe it's a different kind of life and living you have, but why would that be? Why is that lesser? You know, maybe there's some things you can't do. But, you know, I think there is quite a lot of and that's probably something that's gonna, if we are gonna be, as is kind of already predicted, like, you know, living longer lives and and healthier lives, like, that's an important thing to shift, because if we're living longer lives but we still hate the idea of being old, or we feel we're older, like, oh no, I'm not the person I used to be, or, you know, or doing like whatever about dementia, like, you know, it's not going to be that fun to live in that in that society. So I think that's probably something that, you know, as I think a lot of the time, you know, it's the changes in technology are not what I mean, and they can kind of trigger this, but like a new technology being available, or being able to do something, or, you know, like or a new treatment for something, it can change a lot of things. But what's really interesting, or kind of maybe what has a bigger impact, is like what it does to change people's attitudes about things.
Yeah, of course.
You know, so that then if people start, I suppose that did happen with aging, and with in terms of better healthcare and stuff, and less disease, that when people did start living longer, then I suppose at a certain point it was like, oh yeah, now people who are in their 60s and 70s, you know, aren't, you know, people are talking about it now because it's the thing of like being in a vulnerable group, and, you know, you shouldn't go outside if you're over 70. And then, you know, people saying, well, that's the thing, a lot of people don't even are finding it hard to acknowledge themselves, because a lot of people in their 70s are very like healthy and active, and maybe even still working. And so it's hard for a lot of people who are in that age bracket to even acknowledge that they're
the vulnerable group,
a vulnerable group, because, you know, I was saying it's not old, and so, you know, that what is old, you know, so or like not feeling old. So I suppose that wasn't, you know, I suppose 100 years ago, maybe would people in their 70s have felt older? I don't know.
It's hard to tell. I think it would have been mostly that there were fewer of them. Exactly. I just want to read out Matthew's response to the question of what it would be like if we were all living into those ages. He said, we'd all start walking really slowly and talking in an annoyingly long-winded way of the elves in Lord of the Rings. And I think that's a very good answer.
Lord of the Rings.
Basically, the uncertain future that we're looking at here is these sort of weird corporate greeny cities where everything's semi an exhibition, and we're surrounded by all these slow-moving elf people who remain mystifyingly interested in the future despite the amount of time that they have spent watching the world with intact brains. I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it fits with these elven folks, elderly elven folks, would fit in quite well in the Disney cities of the future, I think.
Indeed, I think they would be a perfect exhibition. Oh my god, it's so meta.
Okay, well, I think that's a good place to maybe finish off. And if you didn't have any other final...
No, I think you're right. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. Goodbye, our concurrent viewers. I won't name how many of you there are, but it's a pretty big number. All right.
Also, if people are people who are listening to us rambling on, if there's particular things you want us to talk about, if you want also to, I don't know, talk to us or something, I don't know, then let us know what directions we should ramble in.
Absolutely.
Suggestions.
I am not above any gimmickry. Grant. All right then. I'll chat to you later, John.
Okay. Bye-bye.